Hello. This episode we'll be hearing from Jim Shaikh, Managing Director of Innovate Surrey. We'll be hearing about the challenges of spinning out from universities.
The overarching driver, from my point of view, now seems to be science, and how can you create products, services for the market from scientific endeavour. That seems to be the driver.
We'll also be hearing about why Jim thinks that more universities should be focusing on licensing of IP rather than just focusing on spin-out numbers.
I'd invented something. I wanted to see how I could actually turn it into something that may have some market value. Didn't quite work. That wasn't the reason I left, but left to BMW, and that's how I learned to be an engineer. And then I came at it from another angle of how can I use science.
Jim will discuss the challenges in licensing IP, in particular around software-related inventions.
From the point that you receive the initial idea and you're filing the patent to actually exiting at a sale event, that could be 10 to 12 years.
This is Innovation Unlocked by Mathis and Squire. Hello. So for this episode, I'm joined by Jim Shaikh. So Jim Shaikh is MD of Innovate Surrey Limited. You previously headed up the Greenhouse Accelerator in partnership with Imperial. Before that, you were Senior Commercialisation Manager at Queen Mary. And before that, you had many other businesses that you ran.
Yep.
So quite a varied career there.
Checkered, I think the word is.
No. But I think a theme throughout that is your focus on intellectual property, which I think is obviously very interesting to us, and about intellectual property and commercialisation. So I think that'll be a big focus of this episode. So maybe can you tell us a little bit about your career today, expand on some of those roles, and maybe then talk about what it is that you're doing at Innovate Surrey.
Okay, thanks. My career has got, I think, three main parts, and there is sort of, in hindsight, seems to be an overarching driver. And the overarching driver, from my point of view, now seems to be science, and how can you create products, services for the market from scientific endeavour. That seems to be the driver. So I started off as an academic, and I was into fluid mechanics, aerodynamics, sort of cars and aircraft. But
did you work with Rover and BMW?
Yeah, I sort of lost my research and then went into to work for Rover BMW, which is an amazing place. I've worked both in the UK and in Germany. So German,
I grew up right next to the Rover Works in Cowley in Oxford. So I remember.
Yeah. I remember visiting that plant. Story.
Okay.
I remember going to the Cowley plant. I was doing aerodynamics, but they had a problem with some fluid mechanics in one of the transmissions. And I went up to see the plant, and that was an amazing experience of seeing things on the conveyor belt. The first time, being an ex-academic, going out there and actually seeing sort of some high-tech stuff, which is brilliant, but then some sort of really low-tech stuff, because they come at the end of the line, there's somebody who just had to sort of bang the thing, put the thing together. And it was, I was thinking, that was really amazing, from all the high-tech stuff at one end and at the other end, there's something just going bang.
Yeah.
So I did that for a while. So firstly, I was an academic, and when I was an academic, I did try to actually commercialise IP.
Okay.
And I found it a really tough thing to do. Didn't quite succeed.
What about it did you find tough?
Just dealing with the university and the processes and systems were quite new at that time, commercialisation. I'd invented something. I wanted to see how I could actually turn it into something that may have some market value. Didn't quite work. That wasn't the reason I left, but left to BMW, and that's how I learned to be an engineer. And then I came at it from another angle of how can I use science. I was hired to use science to digitize some of the process. So we're using sort of simulation technologies to try to take away prototype stages. We used to test something physically. Can we test it on a computer? So I was brought in to do all of that work. And then went to engineering consultancy. And then I got really interested in the commercialization. So how do you commercialize science? And I thought a good way of doing that would be do an MBA. So I did an exec MBA for a while, and I got bitten then by the entrepreneurial bug and thought, I saw all these people with one-page business plans around the 2000s, and they're all sort of lawyers and accountants. I thought, I'm an engineer. Surely I should be able to do something. From about 2002, 2003, I ran my own businesses for about 15, 16 years. So three different versions. I think I call it sort of one win, one loss and one draw. So that was a way it worked.
Balances out.
Balance out. And then I sold the last one in 2019. It was selling a business is quite, for me, it took about a year. I had to go somewhere. And then I was able to sit back and think, where do I want to go? And it was how can we commercialize science? And so I looked at tech transfer, and that's when I started. I've been tech transfer for about 6 years. So I sort of view tech transfer from both an academic's point of view, to understand where they're coming from, let's say, collaboration partners' point of view, sort of looking into university and trying to work out how they can work with them, and then maybe from the university's as tech transfer point of view. And what I'm trying to do at Surrey now is bring all those together and try to develop a tech transfer office that meets the needs of all three of those constituents. So that's what I'm doing now. I've been there 3 months.
So you talked about it took a year to sell
the business. Yeah.
Like, how come it took so long, and what were the challenges with that?
I'm not sure. I haven't been through as many to actually see if that's a representative sample. I don't know. It took a year because you go through a process in which, and it's ups and downs as any process is. Yeah, you're on a high when you've got 3 or 4 people talking to you, and you're then negotiating with them, and then eventually at some stage you have to come down to one that you might do heads of terms with. And it's the first time I did it. Maybe it was a little bit naive. And so you come down to one, which is great, and then heads of terms, and you think most of the work's done. No, it just starts. That's the starting point at which, again, it is a bare knuckle negotiation. And so quite often, and you'll find people who've done this will say, well, then sometimes the terms tend to change. Heads of terms is no legal commitment whatsoever, and you go down the line, and then at every point you go down the line there's an issue. You think, do I bail and try to find the other guys I was talking to? And you get sort of locked into a cycle, and then you get into the nitty-gritty of the sale process and the legal documents and going round and round, and ultimately you come down to a question of whether there's enough there to keep going. And we had to take a haircut, and most people do as you go through, and it's trying to just close the deal and get out and get the money in the bank. And we did so just before COVID, just before lockdown hit. So we managed to get out before that time. But that was quite, and I need to do something in the meantime. They 2P'd most of the staff across, but not the founder. There's a normal way of things. And so I was doing that whilst working at the same time. So it was quite a time of it, but really good experience. I'm now, hopefully, all those mistakes that I made going forward, I'm providing the benefit of that experience to the companies now I'm working with in the spin-out sector. Yeah.
So with your new role at Surrey, what are the main challenges you think that you're facing?
There are some challenges specific to Surrey because of its location and where it is. I mean, just because every institution has its own challenges. But in general, tech transfer offices are sat there and they're given the task to help to commercialize IP. What does that actually mean? In general, what that means for a tech transfer office tends to be, well, how do we take the IP, help to develop the opportunity that the IP sort of sits within. The IP is just one strand of that overall opportunity. The strands are sort of the tech itself, the technology. The other strand is the IP and the defensibility. So I see IP much more around uniqueness, novelty, and defensibility of how you defend the proposition. Then you have the commercial element in terms of, is there market need? What's the route to market? And then the other element is funding. So these propositions take time. And then how do you interface the funding to actually grow the proposition so there's some value in it that you can then decide whether it's a spin out or a license opportunity or a joint venture with the partners. Universities don't actually do business, if you see what I mean. We always need partners. So the spin out is a vehicle, the license is a license to a partner, a collaboration is with a partner. So it's all around bringing those partners in to the frame such that the IP strand gets built upon until it's an opportunity that has value in it.
Yeah, of course. And so when you are looking at that IP strand, when you're thinking about supporting a spin out from the university, are you making an assessment as to whether there is something protectable there and whether it is worth investing in?
Yes. So we are looking to run like a stage gate process as the opportunity develops and moves on. And for me, the IPs are around some sort of signifier of novelty, utility, differentiation, as well as defensibility. And so and then there's a question as you go along as to how you invest the limited funds you have in the different stages of the patenting process. So patents are normally what we look at. And so obviously there's the UK filing, which has a certain cost. And then the issue with the patents is once you start filing, you're on a time schedule for
and you're committed to
large
further
amounts of
costs
cash
down the
line. So you've got a liability, and you can see the patenting, the initial costs as sunk costs. You can't keep following your money just because you put some money in. But at every stage, you need to see the proposition develop in order to such that you know you've got some large fees coming down the line, especially at nationalisation phase. And our aim really is, when we get to nationalisation, is for our partner or the collaborator or the spin out to take up those costs, because they could be significant if you've got a patent portfolio, multiple territories, and then their annual costs.
And do you think universities are facing a particular challenge in terms of funding at the moment? I spoke to some TTOs, and they said, because of the cap on students, especially foreign students, the funds that the university have are quite limited at the moment. Do you think that's representative, or do you think
that is definitely true? And it's across all university departments, not just the TTO office. And so, yes, the finances are constrained. Universities, okay, obviously there's certain universities who are, if you look at the list of spin outs, they're spinning out 20 a year, and they have an ecosystem that's funded. For other universities, it's really tough to allocate the resources to. I had a sort of meeting with my board just the other day, and I was explaining to them that the ROI, or the length of time it takes to get a return, is so long for a spin out, from the point that you receive the initial idea and you're filing the patent to actually exiting at a sale event. That could be 10 to 12 years. Yeah, so you are looking at managing assets for over a long period of time. It's mind shift. It's not like research contracts, and licensing could be 5 or 6 years as well. So the issue is, if you do put money in, you're not going to get a return. So you can't see this as a way of funding universities for the future, because it's such a long period of time. But what it can do is you can use the funds to reinvest in your ecosystem, and so you can do more as you go down the line. That's how I see. And so what we're trying to pitch is really that, we might need some support as we start, but hopefully as we go down, it can be a self-financing proposition.
And so do you think there are more universities should be doing? And do you think it's this mindset shift in this sort of long-term investment in spin-outs? Or do you think there are other things they should be doing as well?
I think there's an over focus on spin-outs and spin-out league tables, etc. There's licensing. I mean, if you strip it right back, what we're trying to do is create economic impact with the research outputs. And one way of doing that, spin-outs, licensing is a perfectly valid way of doing it as well, and collaborations and other ways of creating that impact. Universities, it is difficult because tech transfer offices need to have people who are experienced in spin outs and licensing, and working with companies across the range, and working in that sort of and understanding IP, understanding commerciality. So those people tend to be quite expensive to hire and difficult to find, and so that's why universities do tend to find it difficult. But I think one of the interesting developments that's coming through now is the idea of around shared TTOs. So why does a university have to have its own TTO? If we're looking at sort of place-based innovation and place-based innovation ecosystems, why couldn't universities start to collaborate? And Surrey's part of the Set Squared partnership.
I was going to say, because I was at Bristol, so that's part of Set Squared.
So there's a Set Squared partnership, and that's a partnership that's a collaboration. I'd say there's no official sort of company called Set Squared. There's a collaboration, and it's a way of actually starting to have common ways of dealing with things and have a common conversation. And then there is some government money has gone into sort of some pilots around shared TT offices, so universities sharing TT resources in different ways and forms. And I think that's going to be a way forward to so that we can pool resource together with different universities and do a lot more collaboration, especially around place, so place-based collaborations.
Very interesting.
Yes, it's quite an interesting space, especially with the spending review that's just happened and the investment. I mean, from my point of view, if you look at where the country is going to get its productivity gains or its new technology, I mean, the universities are one of the pillars of that ecosystem. And so driving universities and helping sort of IP commercialization and new technologies to enter the market through licensing, spin-outs or collaborations.
And do you think licensing is an area that's not been exploited as much as it could be?
I think historically licensing was the main driver, sort of maybe 10, 20 years ago, and then spin-outs became the vogue. And I think sometimes people focus too much on the spin-out side, and the licensing is a valid. And so certain technologies are not disruptive that requires a spin-out from my point of view. They're incremental, but they still have value. And a license is then the best vehicle for that sort of commercialization and the impact that will then derive from the technology and the IP that started it all.
Do you think there are differences between the commercialization process for a spin-out and a sort of a regular company?
Definitely. I've been through both.
Yeah,
I've been through both. And I also worked, obviously, as you mentioned, I ran an accelerator at Imperial, which is the greenhouse accelerator, and that was for startups. So it wasn't IP owned by the university. It was an accelerator for IP that came in sort of ideas from Imperial and outside, but focused on clean tech, green tech. So I've been through spin-outs, startups, and my own one.
Yeah, I mean, because I think quite a few of them were undergrads, right, who had ideas. So the university didn't own that IP, but they were from the university.
Yeah, 30-40% from the university, but we also had people from all over the country who. So our area was, it didn't matter where they came from. It was is it focused on climate tech, green tech, and driving that agenda. And from my point of view, one of the main differences between a spin out, i.e. university owned and it's spun out, to a startup is the management team. So quite often with a startup, you've got a basic nascent management team in place. There might be a single founder, but in general, there's 2 or 3 people. And they're the ones that are going to hopefully drive the company forward, and will eventually, as they sort of move through the commercialization process, take roles, bring people on, and you've got a management team. The difference with a spin out is it's normally IP based with an academic or academics who will, and so potentially further ahead in terms of technology, further ahead until the IP, because you've got people like myself to help patent and these sort of things. But then they get to a point of in the maturity in which you need a management team to come on. And where does that management team come from? Is it not all academics can be founders, and not all academics want to be founders, and they maybe that's the academics, they're the reason that they're there. And so one of the key crux points at the spin out is, when do you bring in and how do you bring in the appropriate management team to take that forward together with the academics that they're at the beginning? And that's a real crux point. Whereas maybe for a startup, getting the tech right, the tech development coming through may have been a problem, but they generally have the basis of a management team coming through. So that tends to be, from my point of view, the difference between the two.
Changing tack slightly, industrial partnerships. Do you think that's something universities could and should be doing more to help exploit IP?
Yes. The answer is yes. And universities recognise this. You know, there's partnership functions, strategic partnerships. So for a long period of time, universities recognise, as I said, we don't do the active commercialisation. We need partners to get to the market, to take what we do and take it to the next stage and further stages. And so that's always been the case. And it's just a question about how do you do that? And I think that's the issue. How do you go about interacting with industry and the market in the way that, because sometimes the language of the university and academia is somewhat different to the language and the commercial language of the partner.
Yeah.
And there's that interface, and that tends to be sometimes where things fall over. Timeframes are different generally. When you're in industry, it's got to be done very quickly. Timeframes in academia, if you think about it in terms of research contracts and projects, tend to be very long. And so there's that mismatch between timing, and then there's a mismatch between the university's main job is teaching and research. And this is
Yeah.
something on the side, whereas the
It's
industry's main
primary
job is this is
focus.
what I'm doing and I want this
Yeah.
done. And so there's that mismatch as well. So it's all about the best way to manage the interface, and TT offices are one way. You have other types of build partnership offices in the universities now who manage that interaction, or try to manage that interaction, and have a common language. But it's something that some universities do really well, others not so. And yeah, it's always an active issue of how to match those different perspectives and timelines.
Mm. Mm. So if I was an academic at Surrey,
Okay.
why should I come speak to you? And when's the right time to come to you?
Okay. So we're going to this exercise at the moment, and that's the question. You're an academic, so you're doing your thesis and research. Why would you be interested in commercialisation? And from my point of view, having been an academic, although an applied one, it was about how do I get my research out there? How do I make that impact? I want to see my research do something and impact on society, rather than just write my paper and have that impact, which is brilliant, but I wanted to get it out there. So the question is, how do you get it out there? How do you make a difference? How do you drive forward the impact from your research? And commercialisation is one of those routes of doing so, but also it's a feedback mechanism, because the more it's like when you teach and interact with students, they teach you back. And the same thing when you interact with industry. I might be thinking there's a certain problem out there, but by interacting with industry who are working in that area, then the other problems are really interesting. So academics tend to be problem solvers, and they're looking at a problem and they can use the academic methodology to solve that problem or to drive it forward. It's an interest. There's an academic interest and there's a practical interest. So one is that feedback you get, and to get new ideas and new problems to solve. The other aspect is funding. So businesses can fund using Innovate UK, and there's various mechanisms in which you can actually get funding for your research and interaction. And also the other element of being an academic is actually supporting your students in their careers. And if you've got interaction with industry, then you have all sorts of things around industry placements, apprenticeships, and that will help as well. So I think it benefits both in terms of the academic benefits and industry benefits as well.
So Jim, as you were saying earlier, you had a successful business that you sold, sort of one that went sort of middle, and then one less so well. Obviously, you've also been involved in supporting a lot of other startups and scale ups through the other programs you've been involved in. One term I've heard is called the valley of death. A lot of startups, they kind of do quite well. They might get an initial bit of seed funding and then difficult to scale and go further. How do businesses traverse that, in your experience, and what tips might you have?
That's interesting. So I think there are, depending on the sector, there's not just one valley of death. There's multiple as you go through, as you get through. So one you might think, from a tech basis, you might think one valley of death is taking the IP and the lab-based results and turning that into a prototype. Yeah, so that's you have to traverse that valley in which you need some funding to do that, and your research funding doesn't give you that funding to do that. So that's one, as that's a proof of concept. And now you've got some funding. Now the government's putting funding, and universities recognise this translational funding, translating IP or from the lab to something that's practical. So that's one of them. And so that's all around getting translational funding and understanding your proof of concept, which proves, that's what it says on the tin, it proves the concept, but to a certain market or beachhead market. That's one. Then the next one generally is you've done that work, you've given it to a customer, and the customer says, "This is brilliant now." And now I'd like to do this with it or that with it. And you think, okay, that's one off. It's taken me years to get one. And how do I scale now to the next case? So there you're talking about, okay, I now have to produce something. And I also then have to price it, and I then have to work out, I know I'm creating value because the customer told me really like it. How do I then actually capture some of that value with a commercial model that allows me to grow down the line? So that's another area that you need to traverse as you go up, because you need to test out with pilots and trials how the product works with a range of customers. That's still product development, but also how do you capture some of that value back? You can give it away for free, But how do you convert that to they call it the unit economics or the commercials? How are they going to start working to develop your sustainable business? It needs money to do that as well. That's another value of F. And the final one then is actually you've launched, you've done a soft launch, and then you need now to scale really quickly. And you need money to scale and actually fulfill the promise of delivering to a large addressable market. And so I tend to see there's three of them. Yeah. And we tend to recognize the milestones of three of them.
Yeah.
And they all require various milestones of money. And where does that funding come from? And obviously there's VCs and private funding. And so there's a whole funding stream that goes along with it.
So obviously, we're from Matheson Squire, we're a specialist IP firm. To us, IP is very important and it's very much our day-to-day work. But from your perspective, both from your commercial side of things, but also the university side of things, how important do you see IP?
From a spin-out perspective, from a university, in which we're sometimes dealing with what's called tech push. We found something. It looks really interesting,
and
we're trying to find the right market for it. Whereas the other way of doing it is market pull. There's a need, and we just try to pull the technology to meet that need. So we're in that space. So IP is really, really important because, as I mentioned previously, it's around. There's two reasons it's important. One is when you have a new spin out, it doesn't have many assets. There's nothing on the balance sheet. And if you're looking for investment, investors generally tend to like to have assets. So the IP in the patent portfolio looks like something that you can grab hold of. It's a real thing, and it gives you the potential for earnings in the future. So that's one thing. The other side of the coin is its defensibility. It gives you that limited monopoly on what you're doing, and so you've got, because one of the questions I had when I first started with one of my businesses was, how long will it take these larger incumbents who have much more money than you to copy you and then blow you out the water?
Yeah.
So how long does it take to copy you? And I would normally say about a year. If they really wanted to, they would try to find a way. And the patent gives you that sort of year of defensibility that you feel that you've got something that will be defendable compared to when these large incumbents come in and try to take over. If you're successful, they will try. So I think there's the two elements of why patents are very important. But I would say that as you go down and the company matures, they become less important to the company. Maybe you might not want to hear this, but they become less important. They're still there. They become less important to that product and that proposition because you're in the market, you're there. But what happens then is you need to generate new IP to keep the thing going. So it's a generation thing. So I think the IP is at the beginning, it gets you a certain way. And then if other things become more important than the IP. But if you want to grow the company and keep doing it, you need more IP. Drive the IP forward.
I mean, because a patent can only last 20 years. So
exactly.
It will run out.
It will run out.
But what about, if you're looking towards an exit, does the IP play a role again there?
Yes, it does. Again, it comes back to having assets. And again, what I learned when I was running my businesses, because we were a business that generated intellectual property and IP and know-how, is how do you put that on the balance sheet? So we used to capitalize some of our IP and put it as intangibles on the balance sheet. That's there. That helps as well. And then the IP is on the balance sheet, and then so it is important at sale because the purchaser, it gives them the opportunity to have some defensibility and have some uniqueness that they could then use in the market. So IP is really, really important to certain businesses. Again, if you look at software businesses, they're probably less important, but they have a different software model.
I think it depends. I think one of the common misconceptions that I encounter a lot is, I've got software is not patentable, which isn't the case.
No.
It's more just the business model might not lend itself to patentability or patenting protection very well, or the service they're offering per se might not be patentable, but it doesn't mean software is not patentable.
No, I mean, and there's still IP there.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
exactly.
if they're working on it, they can still capitalise that IP, put it on the balance sheet.
Probably in the form of confidential information, trade
And
secrets, and
know-how.
know-how.
Yeah. So IP aren't. I mean, we just try to say all the time. It's not just patents that give you IP.
Yeah.
They tell our academics that as well.
Yeah.
And it's know-how as well. And
Yeah.
obviously all the paraphernalia around it.
And then we were just talking about licensing earlier. How do you find if you've got a business that doesn't have much patents but has got that other IP? Does that make it easier? Or is it a challenge with licensing, or is it?
It's a challenge with licensing in the sense that the easiest thing to license is easiest. So the more obvious thing is a patent because you can write it down.
Write the patent number. That's
you can
it.
write it down. So when you've got a license agreement, you need to define the IP. So what is the IP? And it's very difficult to find that IP, and so it's tough. So with software, we've learned how to do it. There's various ways and mechanisms that you can write down what the IP is and what is being licensed across. Because when I was running my businesses, I always thought that a license when you create the license is great, but it's time limited because by the licensee paying you license fees, you're giving them incentive to get around the license, especially if it's successful. Yeah. So I see. So you need to be really clear about what the IP is, but also as let's say the academics further developing it, the key thing is look at improvements. And make sure you have that facility to have improvements coming into the license, and so you can keep the license generating going forward with improvements coming in.
That's a really good point.
So that's quite an important aspect of the license from my point of view, to keep the longevity of the license and keep, let's say, both sides. So let's say aligned with the license and not have that disincentive.
Exactly. It's about incentivizing them to keep paying the license fee. To do that, you need to keep offering them something new.
It's something new, and it's more valuable to them to keep the license going than trying to maneuver around it.
Yeah. Jim, it's been really interesting. We're up against time now, so I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining us.
No, it's a pleasure. Thanks.